Landlords are the problem. 3D printing homes. The government charges too much in tax dollars. Leasing or selling crown land. I mean, you hear the conversation of housing so much. You hear our leaders bickering about it every single day. Well, tonight, we've decided to change it up a little bit. Joining us again is Jonathan Harvey and Anthony Feor to discuss the issue we all know and love, the housing crisis. But first, let's look back at the last time we had these gentlemen on the show together. Let's take a quick look.
We're all putting carbon in the atmosphere. There needs to be policies set up so that it's fair.
You can't just implement policy to make these differences and then just take money out of people's pockets to solve the problem. It is not going to fix it.
We are lagging in this country on research and development, and I am a huge proponent of spending those dollars on research and development.
Tonight, you're in for a unique discussion, I can't lie. Not one, though, filled with he said or she said, but rather a focus on solutions. So with that being said, let's finally start firstly with some of the hottest takes in the housing conversation today. First off, gents, welcome to the show. It is so good to have you back.
Thank you for having us back.
Okay, so one of the things, you guys said you were both landlords, am I correct?
Yes.
Okay, so you might agree on this, but landlords are the problem. I actually got a lot of comments here. One saying, step one, no more landlords. Step two, system fixes itself. Is that true, or are landlords the problem with this housing conversation or crisis?
Very extreme. So I totally disagree with that statement.
Okay,
Absolutely.
but is like, Jonathan,
Yes.
as a landlord,
Yeah.
do you see the side where landlords are the problem?
No, I don't
At
actually.
all.
No. So here's the thing. You've got your interest rates, which are affecting the cost of rent and the
But
cost
is
of
it
homes.
as easy to say that?
No.
It's just interest
There's
rates?
more to it. Yes,
Okay,
definitely.
okay.
That's definitely a contributing factor. There's also a supply and demand issue. There's not enough. There's simply not enough, which also drives prices. Here's the third reason. People can't afford to buy homes. When you add those three things together, you have a market. The economics within the market drive prices up no matter what you do. It's not about landlords being greedy. The economy itself is a mess.
Okay, so one thing, Ruby actually left a comment. I know we said we don't look at the comments, but I had to for this episode because we had too many clips blow up on this. Ruby said something I actually found really interesting. A shift in mindset needs to happen with landlords. A comment I got was that houses should be for living, not for making money off of. That's a really hot take. I get it. But I'm going to be honest with you. As a Gen Z looking at this, naively living only for 20 years of my life, I'm like, wait, if we did shift that perspective and say homes are for living in and not for just making money off of, then would we not have any of these problems?
So what do we do with the generations of people who bought their houses for $95,000 and now they're worth $750,000?
Listen, I had comments on my YouTube shorts and everything saying homeowners are okay with that because they live in their home. They're happy with it. They don't need to make millions of dollars off the equity in their home.
Sure, but I think most landlords and most people who invest in real estate are using it as a vehicle for retirement. That's why I started investing in it. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a small business owner. There is no pension for me. There's no nothing. So this is what I did as a way to have a safe and secure financial future.
Which I get. But is that part of the problem?
Well, the thing is, it's one of the largest economic opportunities for the largest number of people in Canada. You can't take that away and still have capitalism and democracy. You just can't do it.
Flat out.
Flat out.
But I also will admit on the television show that my mindset wasn't to gouge tenants for the next 30 years.
Agreed.
And take all their money and whatever.
That's a lot of landlords' mindsets, though.
Okay, however, I'm admitting publicly that's not mine. I charge fair market rent for my place. I actually lose money a month, like most investors in downtown Toronto right now. But I'm looking at it from a long-term investment point. So if you're going to get into it, you have to be into it for the long game. And the long game is residual value in 30 years.
Okay, so can I ask you guys a yes or no question?
Sure.
If we change the way that we look at housing, rather than it being a retirement plan versus a place to live, would we have these problems?
Yes.
Yeah, I still think you would.
Okay, so anyway, so voters today are voters 20 years from now. I actually sat down with the mayor of Vaughan, Stephen Del Duca, and he said something that kind of stuck with me. Can we play that?
Yes. Yes.
I don't know of a way for us to dramatically reduce the cost of housing for new entrants,
Right.
Gen Z or whoever's coming next, without doing something in a major way that also shrinks the equity that existing homeowners like myself and like my parents and others already have in their home.
So, Anthony, very similar to what you said. I mean, we can't find a way to make homeownership more affordable while then saying that the equity in current homeowners doesn't go down. There's no way. It's this or that, right?
No, but there is a way, and that would be the most draconian way to do it, is you would have to be telling millions of homeowners, you're going to have to sacrifice X number of hundreds of thousands of dollars on equity.
Should they be willing to do that, though, for their kids, for their future?
That's not a question for me. That's a question for those existing homeowners. And I think as a millennial existing in the current housing market, we're looking for our opportunity as well.
Okay, we only have 10 seconds. I'm so sorry. I'm going to ask a
buddy.
point-blank question. Can any political leader fix where we're currently headed? We'll talk about this in the next segment. Yes or no?
Not quickly.
Hell no.
Okay, that's it, bluntly said from
Hell
both
no.
of you. Okay, we'll be right back with what the 80s taught us about housing. You're going to love this.
I'ma rule the world, I'ma rule the world, yeah.
Before we dive into the 80s, it's important to understand what fluctuates housing prices and buying decisions, and I'll go through these quite quickly. A supply and demand imbalance, cultural shifts and preferences, migration and immigration, land use regulations and zoning laws, economic inequality, construction, costs and labor shortages, economic cycles and speculation, government policies, and lastly, global influences. Now, I know that that is a ton, but if we understand that, that allows us to kind of know the history of housing, right, guys?
Right.
Like when we know what affects the price, then we can look, okay, well, that's the problem. Once you identify the problem, you solve 50% of the problem, right? So when we look back in the 80s, 1981, inflation was 12.5%, interest rate hit 21%. Why are we freaking out now?
Well, you have a big difference between earnings and the value of a home, right? So in the 1980, the average take-home income of a family was $31,200. The average cost of a home in Canada was $76,000. That's a 2.5x difference, 2.5.
Okay.
Now it's $75,000.
Sorry, let me just understand. Even with inflation being 12.5%?
I'll give you inflationary
Okay.
in a second. So even now, the take-home income is $75,000, but the average cost of a home in Canada is about $750,000. So now it's a 10x. So you see the big difference between what you take home and the cost of a home. If you adjust for inflation, that $31,200 from 1980 is $100,000 today, and the cost of the home being $76,000 is $250,000 today.
Okay.
So you can see the disparity.
Now you'll see in some of my streeters how some people just say work harder and you'll be okay. So we'll get into that in second seven.
helps, but-
So I guess one of the things I was wondering when I was looking at the 80s, did we ever leave the housing crisis of the 80s, the 12.5% inflation rate and the 21% interest rate? Like, did we ever leave that?
We sure as hell forgot about it. We sure as hell forgot about it. We left we left the 80s, but we brought the piss poor policy with us into the 2020s.
Yeah.
And that was an episode that we did previous. I called it a 40-year issue because it is. And
So
now
you're saying is we basically just prolonged this issue.
look at all of the divestments in housing from federal and provincial governments since 1987. 93, federal government pulls out. 96, vacancy decontrol in Ontario. There have been more incentives to raise the cost of living based on shelter than there have been to bring it down. We've never actually nipped it in the bud, and I don't see...
Okay, so
One other thing I
yeah,
think
go
is
ahead.
very
Yeah.
significant too that you're seeing from the 80s to now. Let's go back to the 70s. They built almost as many homes in 1972 as we did in 2022, but the population was twice as big. So again, that's an infrastructure thing that the government does.
Can I ask though?
Yeah.
Is it realistic to say that we can keep up? Because when you look at European countries, you have families living with families,
Sure.
same home. We don't do that here. We think that it's just normal for a family to have a single family home.
We're starting to.
Well,
You're starting
right,
to
we're
see
starting-
multi-generational homes again. People, it's what you're getting to right now.
Right. I mean, it just goes to show like individualism in society. You can't just live in a single family home. I mean, is that just an expectation that needs to change?
I think you can have a multitude of types of homes. I think that needs to exist in society, and I think a lot of people, especially people whose parents are first generation or immigrants to Canada, where do you think my grandparents and my family lived? They all lived 8 people in a 3-bedroom bungalow on Sullivan Avenue.
So one thing I want to ask, do we know
Like-
what caused, because what I have here is an oil crisis is what actually caused this housing crisis in the 80s and the 70s. Is that true?
I'm not going to blame it entirely on the oil crisis. I'm going to blame it on massive amounts of economic pressure that put pressure negatively on the economy. So some big decisions had to be made.
Well, so there was a war in the Middle East between Arab countries and Israel, right? And we took the side of Israel, and that led to an oil embargo or a petroleum embargo from Arab countries. And then from there, we were short on oil
that was
and
the
energy.
late 70s, I
that
think
right?
that was.
Or
That's
roughly
what
around
caused that
that time?
last price shock, interest rates and inflation. But let's not forget what actually was going on in the 70s. It's not an economy anybody was going home for Thanksgiving about. That was a very rough time for the U.S. and the Canadian economy. Stagflation, all that stuff.
So to talk
Yeah.
about this here, we have about a minute left.
Sure.
Social housing was introduced in the 80s to combat this. Was that the right step?
It's not a bad idea. You always need to provide for a certain portion of society. So I'm on board with it. It's just how we do it and what that looks like.
Is that a
the
step that we
problem.
can bring in today?
I mean, we already have subsidized housing. So what is the difference for you?
Well, okay, so I have a stat here, actually. It's kind of interesting. So basically what I found out was that 0.5% of Canadians live in a sort of a social housing area, or even just in co-op housing in general, versus European countries. It's like in Germany, it's like 5%, like 15, 20% total live in co-op housing or social housing. So there's a pretty big
But
difference.
here's the thing. That's a symptom of a bad economy, because if your economy is doing well, less people live in those forms of housing, right?
Okay, fair.
So if you need more of them, that means that the country's not being managed well, unfortunately. Not that we shouldn't have more, given how things are working out today, but that is a symptom of bad government
So, okay,
policy.
but then this is just clearly something you said. It's been 40, 50, 60 years this problem has been going on.
I said 40. Yeah.
So we're not
have we
solving
done?
this
No, we're
because
not.
this isn't a problem to solve. This is just an expectation shift.
No, first of all, it's a problem that can be solved. You need political will, and you need to have plans to do it. That's
We are
simple.
just
Okay,
doing
but
all
we did
the
have
wrong
plans, and
things.
deficit was 8% of GDP when we introduced the social housing.
I'm not
in
blaming
80s.
that
Okay,
entire
we have
check
one
of
second. We
GDP
gotta-
on building social housing.
We have to
Let's
end it
just
here.
get
We have to
that
end it.
straight.
We'll be right back.
I'ma rule the world, I'ma rule the world, yeah. I'ma rule the world, yeah.
Less than 11% of Canada's land is in private hands. 41% is federally owned Crown land, and 48% is provincially owned Crown land. With so much land, party leaders have discussed utilizing it in some way to increase housing building opportunities. Pierre Poilievre and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau seem to be on opposite sides, though, no surprise, of the Crown land discussion. The Conservatives have proposed to sell off thousands of acres of Crown land, and the Liberals have proposed to lease the land out. Let's take a quick look at this clip here.
We're going to sell off 6,000 acres of federal land, 6,000 buildings and thousands of acres of federal land to build.
We're offering up that public land for housing. And we're not just going to sell it all to developers, we're going to long-term lease it. See, by leasing the land, we get to work with communities to make sure that home builders are building the right homes you can afford.
I think you guys get the tension here, so I'm going to bring it back to the panel. What do you guys think? Should we be using Crown land in the discussion of building more homes? Is this the right solution? To even be in the discussion of Crown land, let's forget leasing and selling first.
Yeah, 100% we should. 89% is owned by government.
It's a lot. It's a lot.
Absolutely, we should be. A lot more of that should be thrown into the public
Anthony?
sector. Definitely.
That's a no-brainer. Absolutely.
Okay.
110%.
Now this is where the conversation begins, is do we lease it or do we sell it?
If you're
Or can we do both?
If you're leasing the land, you're essentially nationalizing it in a sense because it's government owned, which means you need more government control, more government intervention. Now they have control over, in a sense, like he said, what you do with the land. That's very dangerous for Canadians. Individual
not necessarily.
liberty.
Like when you look at, so in China and Dubai, which we all know have a huge uptick in development, that's not a
If you
concern
compare
at all.
Canada to China, you've already got a problem.
No.
Same with Dubai.
I'm just saying is that when you look at leases signed 40, 50, 99 years, the government stays completely out of it. And I did a lot of research on this. China doesn't even direct exactly that
They do
the
and they
land for
don't.
those 100 years.
They do until they need to. And then when they don't want to,
Right,
they
but,
can do
but
whatever.
if we want to be able to maintain growth, doesn't the government know better than just an average citizen saying,
Absolutely not. They've shown that they don't. Look at the country right now.
right, but if we need to build more housing, if the government has
Sell
control
it.
over where the land
If you
goes.
sell the land, you will drive the pricing down, right? Because you'll increase supply, so you'll draw. So the demand will still be there, but eventually supply will outpace.
But if land cost, if you have to build something, if it's $750,000 to buy a plot of
Right.
land, then on top of that's $1 million to build a
Okay.
triplex, let's say,
Sure.
just from ground zero. That's
Got it.
$1.75 million to do
Yes.
it. Then you have to sell it.
Yep.
It just makes it's crazy to me. So then if we just say, well, if we reduce that and say, well, you could just lease the land as a developer, and then that cost gets brought on obviously to the individual renting, could it just be cheaper?
Again, the government owns it, which is going to be a long-term problem
But
for
if the
individual
lease
liberty.
is 50 to 100 years, then
Sure.
how is that a problem? The government can't do anything for 50 to 100 years.
The thing is, if they own it, ultimately they can, and you're in a dangerous position. We're quickly losing our individual freedom. And when the government owns more stuff, you're moving more towards socialism, and then you're kind of knocking on the door of communism, which you mentioned with China. I think you have to be careful.
Okay,
with those
but is
moves.
Dubai I don't like a lot of land in
How do you feel about
Dubai?
civil rights in the Middle East?
Okay, Anthony, I want to hear your thoughts because we've gone halfway through this.
Is there an equal time rule? No, I'm just kidding. So let's break it down to the very first point. I'm more in favor of leasing the land, especially close to major points of infrastructure, transit lines, mass transit, subways, etc. I do agree to a certain extent where there is land that you can sell, and I do think that a majority of it depends on what the land use is for. So apartments, public housing, land lease has to happen.
I agree with that.
Building
Okay,
developments.
so
But if it's public housing, it's already owned by government. I'm okay with that.
Yes, but
Same.
but
Doesn't make a
wait,
difference.
I'm actually curious though. Who owns the land on public housing or like social housing or like who owns that land?
It's a variety of level of government.
Yes.
So Toronto Community Housing Corporation can own
Okay,
it.
I see. I didn't know that.
Government of
Yeah.
Ontario
Okay.
can. Federal
So,
government
but why
can.
is it one or the other? Like, why do we have one leader saying we want to sell it, and one leader saying we want to lease it. Like, is that seriously just like a political
so,
campaign?
So first and foremost, it's absolutely is a political campaign, because if Prime Minister Trudeau says something, Mr. Poilievre has to say something different.
I know you're going to say the absolute opposite.
I think that just one quick point. I think that leasing the land right now is probably the best way to do it, because there's accountability of what the land use is for. If you sell the land, I've seen this happen in Toronto. Oh, we're going to build 150 units in this development. Oh, we changed our mind now. Now we're only going to build 50.
Right.
If
so
it's land lease, there's more accountability, and there should be government accountability on our crown land.
Let the man speak.
Just one quick point. That's our land, and we, at the public, should have a say in what's done with it as well.
Well, they do, because they're the ones that approve all the plans, and if you've done building, you know that there's inspectors every step of the way. They're the ones that tell you what you can and can't build on it anyway through all the different bylaws. So that's a moot point to me. I don't buy into it.
I don't think it's a moot point. I think that
Wait, can I ask a question? How is this any different than property taxes, though, if you're leasing the land?
I don't agree with property taxes either. I think they're insane.
Okay, well, the municipalities are completely underfunded. You need something to pay the government to
How about you cut
put in
government
social
spending?
services.
Oh, boy.
Municipalities are so tight nonetheless.
Name 3 programs.
Okay, wait.
Yeah.
So we have 10 seconds. I have to leave you here.
Leave it here.
We can agree that there should be maybe a hybrid option.
I
More
think
selling on
I'm
your
on the
end,
same
a little
page
less.
with him. If you're going to use it for government housing, 100%
I have to cut you off. Okay,
yes.
we'll be right back.
I'ma rule the world, I'ma rule the world, yeah. I'ma rule the world, I'ma rule the world, yeah.
Canada's unemployment is currently 6.6%. Now, for those that don't know how crazy this is fairly high. During COVID-19, we saw 13% unemployment, and we certainly, at least I know, how that felt. Now, why does this matter when you're talking about housing? If you're like me, you may be confused, because this is what you've been told by almost all media and politicians. We're short on skilled labor. Bring in more skilled labor. I see you guys nodding your heads. Thank you. Well, we brought in 405,000 immigrants in 2021, and so many more after that, with around 60% of these immigrants being skilled workers, or so we were told. My biggest question is, why are we then still 93,000 jobs short in industries struggling to fill nationwide? So, guys, I want to ask the panel here, because I'm just curious, like, did bringing in these the immigration that we did, millions of immigrants over the last 4 or 5 years, fill the job market like we needed?
It did and it didn't. Because now, so it didn't. And now we're seeing a lot of those people now, they're not going to be able to continue their temporary work, or they're not going to be able to continue working.
Leaving.
Well, they're not leaving, they're being deported, because now their work permits are starting to expire. But one crucial thing, though, you left out of there is the record number of international students we brought into the country that exacerbated housing costs in major urban centers, even places like Niagara.
Pause really quick. Give me a quick 15-second rundown of how international students would raise the price of housing, because that's not something that's so common knowledge.
Okay, so you have 10 apartments and you have 100 international students. What happens?
Demand.
Yes, it's $2,000 bucks. I'll give you $2,500. I'll give you $2,600. By the way, we have used international students as a way to fund the vehicle that is our post-secondary institutions, which I think is a crying shame in this country.
I don't want to get into that.
No, but that's why we brought them in, by the way.
So one of the things, I actually spoke to 2 manufacturers I had lunch with because I was doing this, and they said, don't quote me on this, but 95% of the applicants we get for manufacturing jobs are Indians, and they're not skilled labor.
Okay.
So I guess, like, what's the disconnect here? Because I actually did think that we brought in a lot of skilled labor. At least I know with the age group that we did, it's about 20% higher than what we did in the 80s.
I think it's a percentage game. Like you said, we're bringing in 2024, we're going to bring in about 1.5 million people and about 500,000 permanent residents. So which cohort are you choosing from, right? So if you're just choosing from the 500,000, then you got 100,000 people that would meet that threshold. But you still have 1.4 million people that are now here that don't meet those qualifications. So now you're driving housing prices. You're breaking down infrastructure.
Oh, I see, because they don't have work.
Correct. But when you bring that many more people in, you need to provide more infrastructure to support these people. So you need to create more jobs, which makes sense. Right. But we're outpacing it with too many people. That's the issue.
So it's the idea that there's too many people, which I think people get. One of the questions I have, though, is should we be more focused on Canadians filling these jobs than just the jobs being filled in general?
1,000%.
Okay, so how about 1,000% to what?
Yeah, we should.
You're laughing.
With Canadians. Sorry, I apologize. You should be trying to fill the jobs with Canadians. Look, we're already one of the most, if not the most multicultural, multi-ethnic countries in the world. So this isn't about xenophobia or anything else, but take care of Canadians first. That's your job.
Anthony?
I would love to see the number of Canadians that are lining up to work at Tim Hortons or lining up to work for 17 bucks an hour.
Which is fair.
So I'm telling you right now, you are going to need to have this kind of skilled labor force come into the country. I don't like calling service sector low skilled. I was a waiter for 10 years. You need to have a lot of skill to work in that job.
But you also have one of the lowest percentages. Sorry, you have one of the highest percentages of unemployed youth right now because of a lot of that, right?
That's also a legislative decision made at the provincial level because they got rid of student minimum wage and now you pay students the same as minimum wage. So that has disincentivized businesses. I'm not blaming immigrants entirely on that.
The feds also have a minimum wage that's just as high pretty much as every other province.
So I have to jump in here because we have a minute and a half left. I'm so sorry. But one of the things that I actually want to make note of is that this has changed.
It's about housing.
So I'm gonna favor your side here a little bit because there's been some adjustments that have been made. So one of the ones is basically fewer applicants are now getting approved for low wage positions.
Yes.
Is this the right step forward?
Absolutely it is.
What does this change for us?
Well, first of all, it changes the amount of people that are going to be approved for their permanent residency or they're going to be approved to have their work permit extended as temporary foreign workers.
So good step by the Liberal government.
Absolutely good step. But here's the thing. If you make a mistake, say you made a mistake and own up to it and change the legislation. All I've seen is a change in legislation. I think that would be a nice outreach to the public in the country. But and I know people don't like that I use this, coming out of the pandemic, I think everybody's hairs were standing up on their head, making really quick and rash decisions now that have had adverse effects on housing and the economy.
Okay, so I would let you jump on that, but I have a point that I want to make about Japan. So Japan has been trying to bring people in, but they haven't been able to.
Okay.
And so housing costs have actually gone significantly down because they've had population collapse and the fear of it over the last 20 years.
Yes.
Should we have just accepted that we had a birth rate of 1.3 and maybe we should just let it cool off a little bit to bring housing prices down? You got 15 seconds.
Here's the problem. We've been building our GDP on immigration since World War II. So you need a certain amount of it to keep our economy going. That's how this machine operates. It's just that we're letting in too many that it's actually counterproductive.
So it wasn't balanced. That's
correct.
It wasn't balanced. In the last 3 years, it has not been balanced.
Okay, all right. We can all agree on that. We'll be right back with our next topic.
I'ma rule the world, I'ma rule the world, yeah. I'ma rule the world, yeah.
In speaking privately with developers, their largest concerns about development is the landlord-tenant agreement. I know this is going to be a hot take in this one. While it doesn't directly affect them, it does indirectly make their development less appealing in some capacity. We'll talk about that a little bit further. Eviction for non-payment of rent. This is crazy, and both of you guys are landlords, so we'll talk about this. Maybe all agree. Is typically takes between 3 to 6 months in Ontario. So why would you buy an investment property right now? Answer that question. Can
Why would I buy one right now?
Didn't you just buy a condo?
That was a principal residence.
Oh, I see.
Yes.
Okay, all right.
I think you're talking about a small group of people that are either in a tough enough situation they can't afford it or they're bad apples. But that's a very, very small sliver. And I think for the most part...
As a landlord, have you ever had problems, both of you, with tenants not paying?
I don't even want to go down that route. I don't want to jinx anything.
I have, but not long-term issues. Just can you float me for a month, this, that. That's about it.
Okay.
And that's
that's actually a good story.
Yes.
Okay, so because from what I see, like I literally spoke to some of the biggest developers in Niagara here that build like 400 homes, like it's crazy. And they literally said the landlord-tenant agreement is something that's completely destroying their ability to sell this to investors or homes that are innovative in their way.
But is it the agreement or is it the legislation around it?
No, let's say this, because if a developer builds a triplex to be sold to an investor for the investor to then rent out, the developer has to make sure it makes sense cash flow-wise. If it does, well, then you also have the problem of the landlord-tenant agreement where the investor, in a time when it's extremely volatile with price and everything, you can't expect that you're not going to have a problem with a resident not paying rent.
I think it's
so the investor's not going to buy the property.
You have to consider it as a cost of doing business. If you're going to have,
I've heard that, but
again, if you're going to play that scale game, that's what it is, right?
But guys who have $10 million to put into 5 different developments and actually build housing aren't going to want to deal with that eventually. They're tired of it.
So first of all, don't put all your eggs in one basket. And him and I are going to agree on something else in this episode, because there is a tremendous amount of risk on the landlord side.
Yes. To
buy an investment property, and then I guess the flip argument is don't buy an investment property. Okay, great. If you can't take the heat, buy an air conditioning company, no problem. So the risk is on both ends because of the unaffordable cost of living. Yes, I feel for the tenants. I've advocated for rent control and rent freezes on this program many times.
That's one of the things I was going to ask. Why did we remove rent control when, I get both sides of it, but it's just
who wants to give the answer?
I think it's a really tough thing to do in a volatile economy. It's challenging to do because the thing is, if interest rates do go up, then what? The landlord now has to eat that cost. There's got to be an ROI in a business, or else it's not feasible, right? You can only eat it for so long, because then the landlord loses the business or the home. In this case, then what happens to both people?
Which I get, but that like skyrocketed rent prices on new construction, and now it's like, why would you buy a new construction home?
I'll go back. You have supply and demand. You have interest problems. You have inflation problems. These are primarily government. A lot of these are from government.
We're not going to solve this. So let me ask you this question.
Okay, go ahead.
Should the landlord or the renter have more control over the living situation?
It should be equal. It always should. No,
you can't tell me you can make it balanced.
You can absolutely make it balanced, because here's how you make it balanced. You don't pay. You don't live there. Balanced. Now, do you get thrown out in the first month? No. You mentioned you floated tenants for a month. That's called being a reasonable landlord or business person. Yes. If my tenants couldn't pay rent, don't want to invoke anybody here, we would have to make an agreement. But after 3-4 months of consecutive non-payment of rent, by the way, the actual documents are there to file. It's the damn landlord and tenant board where you can't get a friggin' hearing. Right. And that is an abject failure of the provincial government. Okay, absolutely
I'll say this. So I gave you some credit for the Liberal government here. Premier Ford did just come out literally while I was writing this, saying that they're actually going to revamp this and make it even more quicker.
Which is what they need to do, because
what does it look like, though?
Well, I actually agree with you completely. Yeah. It's the landlord-tenant agreement may need some adjustments, sure, but the reality is, if the infrastructure in place does not manage these problems adequately or efficiently, then you have a much bigger problem. Because if it's 3 months, then you can boot somebody out, but it takes 9 months to get a hearing. Now that person's there for a year. That's now the cost of doing business just doesn't track for a landlord. That becomes unfair.
Where in this country do you get to not pay for something for 9 months and there's no consequences? And by the way, I've read the tweets, because it's all tweets right now. We're reforming the landlord-tenant board. The biggest problem is the number of adjudicators to clear the backlog of hearings, because here's the next 5-star migraine headache that you might agree with me on. The number of evictions that are going to be coming, and where the hell are all these people going to go? It costs the government less money to keep them not paying rent than it does to actually try the cases.
So then where's your incentive? Exactly. So it's a government-driven problem. It was a government-created problem.
So we can settle on that then?
I'm not going to blame both levels of government entirely on creating the problem, but they do have the tools to fix it.
But at the same time, I
feel like they're in bed together. You got the federal government that's creating most of the problem, and the provincial government that's letting it continue. We got 10 seconds here.
So, I mean, we have to avoid, like, I see the tension here. We have to avoid landlords taking advantage of tenants. You know, if they skip a payment by 3 days, you can't just kick them out. But then on top of that, it's like, in such a crisis of unaffordability, you also have to leave room for graciousness from that side. I don't know. It's a tough. We have 5 seconds.
You need shovels in the ground. Keep building housing. That's
all right.
it.
Okay. We'll be right back. A recent study by the Altus Group outlines government charges on new home development in Toronto. It found that average taxes for each new single-family home in the city were 21.7% of the average price. I'm going to leave it at that. Is that too high?
It's way too high.
21.7%. Can you just outline really quick, 10 seconds, what that means?
Well, the thing is, if you're building a home and it costs you $1 million, they're taking $210,000 in something called soft costs, which is a euphemism for more government tax. Get rid of it. Cut government spending.
Okay. Your thoughts?
I disagree, because we have to build infrastructure. You need pipes for plumbing. You need roads to get there. You need transit.
Which is valid in I interviewed a couple of mayors on this. They don't have enough money to do this, so that's why they charge
It's inefficient spending. You need 5%, not 21. Spend it efficiently.
But I also think that they're also building up a pool, because things break, things need to be repaired. There's infrastructure all across Niagara. There's still lead and wood piping for drainage.
They're building up a pool, yet they have a massive deficit?
Wait. So we don't have access to the spreadsheets of every single municipality in Canada, which is over 2,000. Yeah. So we can't, I'm not going to even spend time on it.
But I can tell you right now that it's illegal for municipalities to run a deficit in Ontario. It's a balanced budget amendment. You have to have a balanced budget.
And like, I get that side. But one of the things, and this is where I kind of back you, I bring up China and Dubai again because I did do a lot of research on them. Listen, development has exploded there, and I was just curious as to why. Again, naive 20-year-old. But one of the things that I want to know is that their taxes, I mean, on a newly constructed home is between an average of 10 to 15%. Not 21.7. And by the way, I was generous with the 21.7. Sometimes it's up to 30%.
Yes.
If you look at like BC, sometimes up to 30%. So I'm being nice with the 21.7% here. Do we need to just lower it to get it to this point of 10, 15%? I'm going to ask you this.
Okay, so how about this? And maybe him and I will find some common ground on this. Look at the income tax base that is in China. It is a socialist market economy. We don't want that for our economy. Look at Dubai. What does Dubai have? First of all, they have the natural resource sector, and they have a tremendous amount of the financial sector in there that subsidizes tax revenue, so they don't have to have a high tax base.
Well, this is where
we
talk
are a
about natural
different
resources
country.
in Canada.
We're a
Yes,
different
We should
country.
be leveraging our natural resources more, that's for sure, but that's a different
Don't go
conversation.
there, yeah.
However, if you want to drop the price of homes and make it more competitive, drive the prices down in some way, that is an economic lever you should be pulling. The government should be cutting costs.
In Dubai, new residential properties sold within 3 years of completion are exempt from a value-added tax. Yes or no? Good? I mean, to me, I'm like, if we're trying to promote new construction, then wouldn't that just make sense?
Educate me quickly on what a value-added tax is.
It's a tax.
Like a sales tax or like a vacant home tax?
It's just like a tax.
Well, we already rebate HST on new construction in Ontario. I got my check back when my condo was completed. We already have that lever. This is the conversation that needs to be had on the levels of government. If they want to lower the cost of building, maybe the provincial government should be eating the development charges for the next couple of years.
Instead of the municipality.
Yes, to get housing built faster. The federal government did GST on rentals.
5%, saved about 5%.
But maybe they should be incentivizing something else. We're going to have to run deficits to build more housing, and we have to be comfortable with that as a society.
But why?
I do not disagree with you on putting those. Pardon me. I do not disagree with you on putting that load on the provincial or federal government versus the municipality. Totally agreed. Yeah. However, I do think we should be thinking more about like what is the fixed cost of these things that they need to do? Like you said, infrastructure. Because if the value of a home goes up to $2 million, they still take 21%. So now that's $420,000. Sure. So you don't do you actually need that much money? Because if the infrastructure only costs $100, then why do you need this additional chunk of $320,000?
So what are you proposing?
So what he's talking about is capped levy or capped development charges.
Yes.
Okay, so that's something we maybe can find some common ground on. I agree with you.
Wait. Again, you're talking to 20, 30-year-olds here, guys. So just take it easy for a second. So help me understand. Give me 15 seconds of what that is.
Fix the pricing based on the cost to do the work that the government needs to do, not on the value of the home. Because the value goes up, then the government has a percentage. They just keep taking more money, but the cost to do their job doesn't increase. So it's driving the cost of homes higher.
So can I ask a question? So we see a lot of incentives, like CMHC is offering like low-cost loans, this kind of stuff. You brought up GST on new rental housing construction. We're removing that, so that's saving about 5%, which is why I think it's gone down to about 21.7%. One of the things I also looked into was inclusionary zoning. Can we quickly break down what that is?
Yeah, it's mixed use, and you have to have a certain number of mixed use zoning for one particular development is you have to have a certain number of affordable housing units for one development. That's the best example I can give you. The one condo that I own, 5% of the units had to be affordable housing. It was because it was built on Toronto land.
But who pays for that? Like what's affordable, and then who pays for that?
Who in this country can define what affordable housing is right now? Okay, nobody can actually do that.
Is this government subsidized, or is this like developers have to take a 5% hit or something like that?
They are incentivized by the city, so they really receive some kickback from the municipalities.
So it's incentivized by the government.
Yes. Both sides take the hit. That's what it is.
Do we need more of this? We literally have 10 seconds. Do we need more of inclusionary zoning? Because from last when I looked, like Premier Ford actually pulled back on this a little bit, which I didn't necessarily agree with.
It upsets people that have a lot of money, but I don't totally disagree with it.
Okay, all right. So we can leave it at that. We can cut. Okay,
yes.
All right. I'm so excited to see what people on the streets have to say about this. Stay tuned.
I'ma rule the world, I'ma rule the world, yeah. I'ma rule the world, yeah.
Do you rent or own a home?
I just rented.
Oh, you own a home.
Oh.
When did you buy your home?
19.
Oh my God.
Oh, I still live at home. I am 27.
I bought my first home when I was 19.
We own it.
We rent a home.
You rent a home. Gotcha. Have you noticed it's been more challenging to keep up with the rising cost of mortgage or rent or whatever it may be?
Solid, yeah.
Yeah.
It's too expensive, man.
Too expensive.
Yeah.
What can I ask? What do you currently pay a month?
It's $500.
Really, eh? Have your salaries or your pay kept up with the cost of the mortgage or the cost of paying rent?
Yes.
No.
No, it hasn't.
Definitely not.
Is it something that you're concerned about at all?
We're old.
During COVID, we were able to refinance when the rates were really low, and we haven't had any problems.
Do you think there's a political leader that can solve the crisis we're currently in?
No comment on that one.
Get Trudeau out and you'll be able to own a home.
No.
Why not?
It's not just them, it's all the businesses and everything.
It takes a system. It takes a community. It takes a village.
From my generation's perspective, do you think we'll ever be able to own a home, or is that dream kind of extinguished?
It's extinguished.
Oh, yes. Very possible.
As long as you got your head on level, right? Yes, absolutely.
How come?
You should work hard. Go to school, work hard.
Anybody can own a home if they're ready.
How'd you guys grow up? Did you grow up with money or not with money?
Not with money. I like to work. So I know if I work, I can get what I want.
I'm excited for the segment. Here's the thing. You're all hearing build more homes, just build more homes. But what does that actually look like? Let me make this easy to understand. In 2023, Canada completed around 223,000 housing units, according to recent data. Our goal is 3.5 million homes built by 2030. To say it kindly, that's just not going to happen. So, guys, one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about was condos. Why is it that in a time where you know what I'm asking, in a time where we have so much demand, we have so much vacancies in condos in Toronto?
They're not a good investment right now. That's the just
like,
brass tacks.
It's like $750,000 for. Like you live in Toronto. Can you?
I can get you a one-bedroom around the corner for
Okay, all right,
$480,000. So no, it's not a bad investment at all. Now's the time to buy a condo. It's the worst condo market in 33 years. What is your purpose for buying it? To rent it out? I wouldn't advise that
That's
right now because of the added cost.
Term.
But if you're a first-time home buyer, I've called half of my friends. You got 30 or 40 grand? Rock and roll, baby. We're going to.
So I have
wherever.
a stat: 45% of condos for sale in Toronto right now are vacant.
Yes.
Why?
Because people can't hang on to them and they don't want to take on the risk of being a landlord.
Okay, so what you're telling me is that in maybe a few years, prices are for sure going to adapt to what the market is saying, and we're going to see a major drop in prices and listings of condos.
You're not necessarily going to see a major drop in prices, but you're going to see an increase in wages. Something's going to level out. It always does. We find some sort of homeostasis.
It's not going to be wages. Wages have barely increased over the last 20 years.
You've got to do one or the other, right? So if you have a major deflationary period, that comes with a lot of other problems, right? That comes with unemployment. That comes with bad business, a lot of bankruptcies. That is a much more significant problem.
Okay, Germany. I'm pulling up Germany because I actually did a lot of research on this, and I'm reading this book, Our Crumbling Foundation. It's fascinating. One of the things that they talked about was that Germany, and I brought this up earlier, 5% of their housing stock and 10% of rental units as co-op housing. In Canada, just over 0.5% live in co-op housing. So clearly we're underutilizing co-op housing. Do we agree with co-op housing?
Yes.
Do you?
I don't disagree with it.
I'm not going to lie, Jonathan. Like I looked at this and I'm like, this seems a little bit more on like the socialist side, which I get from a conservative perspective. Maybe that doesn't sound attractive, but it actually makes sense.
I live in the vicinity of 5 fantastically functioning, equitable and non-equitable co-ops.
Okay, how does the co-op, give me 20-second outline of how co-op.
So the equitable one, you buy shares in the co-op, you pay a monthly fee, and everybody has a stake inside of it. It's a community thing. A non-equitable one usually has government funding or city funding behind it.
Okay.
And everybody pays a small monthly fee. It goes into a pot and takes care of the building. I don't think that is a bad idea to build more housing supply.
Okay, I don't think that it's a bad idea. However, I think it's the wrong road to go down with a significant portion of investment, because when that gets out of hand, then I think you get home ownership. It gets further and further away for the individual family. That's my challenge with it.
But you can sell the shares in an equitable co-op.
Sure,
they usually grow over time.
I do think it does give people a sense of ownership.
It does, but again, I think it's your first step into the market. But I think you don't want to get. I think 10% is high. I don't think you want to get over that part of the market.
Okay, all right. So prefab homes, something we were talking about off camera. The government actually, so another good step by the Liberal government. They made a $123 million investment into prefabricated homes. Can you explain what those are really quick?
So prefab homes, they basically get put together in a factory. They drop together on site. It's much faster. It's more efficient in terms of time and both cost. It is not a bad method whatsoever. And I think it's a good way to drive down pricing of homes. It just has to be a significant portion of new home building, or else it won't drive it down enough.
Would you live in a 3D printed home?
100%. Let's go.
Yeah. I would.
What about shipping container home?
125 million. I'd be putting in $1 billion into that. Get it built faster.
Okay, so we can agree that there's some crazy crap that we need to put in, like prefab homes we never thought about,
and then 3D printing. The next leading, innovating industry in this country to solve the housing crisis and give Canadian workers jobs?
Yes, and what's nice about it is it actually would
lower
the...
You got 2 seconds. I'm going to have to cut you off. Okay, we'll be right back.
I'ma rule the world, I'ma rule the world, yeah. I'ma rule the world, I'ma rule the world, yeah.
This episode has been nothing but just insane fun. I think we can all agree, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we love this. In 2023, according to industry reports, 1 in 5 home builders across Canada halted projects entirely in 23. While it's demanded the government take actionable steps, at the end of the day, help me understand this. It's the private sector that builds homes.
Sure.
Correct.
Yes?
Yes.
I mean, I get there's social housing or co-op housing incentivized by the government, but it's the private sector who puts boots on the ground, shovels in the dirt, and builds homes.
Sure.
Right?
Yes.
Okay. So is
anybody disagreeing with that should not be on a show about housing.
Okay. So let me ask this question, because Is there enough motivation for developers to build right now based on everything we talked about?
It's an economics game, right? If the numbers don't add up, they're not going to do it. If
Is it
taxes are
just
too high,
rates, though, man?
it's a number of things, but maybe not getting skilled workers. Maybe it is the rate to build a home on the soft costs. It's a number of things, but if the economics don't make sense, no one's going to be in the business. It's that simple.
Okay, so I'm gonna, because I think you would agree with that, right?
He's not wrong.
Like,
he's absolutely correct. But interest rates is the easiest one to turn to.
But
right?
my thing is like, well, interest rates is a cause to something that affected that. Like, do you get it's an effect to something that caused that. My bad.
I know what you're saying.
Get what I'm saying? So
100%.
it's like, okay, we have a bunch of things that make life unaffordable, and then we just jack up interest rates. It's not like interest rates are the problem, I don't think.
Right.
No, but they were the problem for a long time. Look how fast they went up. Because construction loans are different than a regular mortgage. But look at the fact of what happened because of COVID-19. 22% across the board price shock. That's an increase. Goods, services, materials, labor.
It'll kill
that
anything.
is not going anywhere. The cost, but by the way, that's just a number. That's not the actual increase of costs on some of these services and goods, right? So
right. No.
That has to be taken into conversation.
I get that. That it's fair. You can't. It's a multifaceted discussion. But what is the main thing? Like, if we wanted to end this show with one thing, which I want to keep this as the focus, what's the main thing we should be focusing on fixing right now?
Okay, so if you go from the government perspective, you need to curb immigration. You have no choice. You need to. It's a supply and demand issue. It's quite simple there. You also need to cut. In my opinion, you need to cut some government spending because it's one of the things that's also driving inflation. Now, these are government things that they can implement. Okay. I think if you lower costs on your soft costs, you're also going to incentivize more building. I think those are some things you could do, and I think if you brought in skilled workers that specifically met these needs, that would help the industry.
Okay. Yeah. Anthony.
I agree with what he said. I'm going to pivot here because I think that government needs to play a part in building housing, and it needs to give developers and the private sector the tools to do the job. So I'm going to go with permanent tax incentives, constant, permanent tax incentives, not 1 or 2 years, permanent, every single year and every single budget to keep shovels in the ground, to keep the supply growing, and to keep Canadians working and contributing to the tax system we need to pay for the tax incentives.
You're against that a little bit, though, like bringing taxes down on new construction or whatever it may be.
I was never against that.
Okay, so you think that we should just bring it down?
Absolutely. I just advocated 2 segments ago for the provincial government to eat the hundreds of millions of dollars in development charges so that builders can keep building supply.
Okay, so I have tax incentives. You got 2 more because Harvey said curb immigration, cut government spending, and bring in more skilled workers.
Well, yeah. What are we doing to incentivize the labor in this country to be skilled? Because when I went to school, it was get a piece of paper, go to university. We have destroyed a generation of skilled labor in this country, and the incentivization and the knowledge and understanding around that needs to push the next generation into the skilled trades.
Without a doubt, shadow of a doubt, agree that when I was during COVID in high school, it was the biggest joke courses. Even like math class was just ridiculously easy. You would go on. I remember doing math class online and stuff. I don't want to go on a rant, but like I can see both sides of that. The education system could be funneling a lot more skilled labor or workers out of their system in college, university.
Incentives has to be across the board.
You didn't say that. You didn't say that as a major thing.
Because I think you should cut government spending. But I did say that they should lower the soft costs, which are taxes. So we're on the same page.
Cut government spending.
And the soft costs, which are taxes.
Still hasn't labeled the program. No, but I think that had, at least in the short term, for eating the entirety of the development charges, because we're in such a crisis. If it's a crisis, treat it like one and take the onus on.
Okay, guys, that's it. It is always so good having you.
I missed him, by
the way.
God.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thanks. So housing involves both expectation adjustments for living standards, government incentives, and action plans, as well as developers being innovative in building solutions. There's so many parties involved that to just blame it all on one is, in my opinion, naive. As a listener, the largest takeaway I feel you should have in this episode is at least one thing that can be done differently by each individual involved in the housing situation we're in. The government, landlords or developers, as well as you, the residents. The issue affects all of us, and all of us need to take responsibility for our own actions. But we want to hear from you, especially if you disagreed or feel we missed something important. Join the conversation at MyGen on all social media platforms. With that, we'll end off with this. Do not simply accept what you are told. Challenge your thinking, engage in differences like we did, and listen to new perspectives. Thank you.